what are some strategies and how important is practice for training those, like you said, mid-match adjustments, changing that strategy?
If you're never in that mindset of, I have a minute left and I have to score, like I have to go, it's going to be really uncomfortable when you're at the Olympic trials and you have a minute left and you have to score. Yo-yo dieting can affect your hunger cues. And so you're no longer, your body kind of like gives up on you in a sense. Then when you ignore it and ignore it and ignore it and ignore it, you kind of lose that hunger cue.
The physiological aspects of cutting weight long term.
There is a psychological component and there's also a physiological component, and the two kind of go together. It could be like one of two things, or it could be a mix of both.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Sean Takes On podcast, where we talk to the leaders of today to empower the ones of tomorrow. Today, I'm joined with my guest, Skylar Grote, 2024 Olympic team trial qualifier, 2023 Bill Ferrell silver medalist, and 2022 U.S. Open champion. Skylar, it's nice to talk to you today. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, thank you so much for having me come on. I'm super excited to talk about some important concepts and things in wrestling.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. Tell us a little bit about your background besides you having a really great resume and accomplishments. What else do people need to know about Skylar Grote?
Yeah, so my background in the sport is I started when I was 8 years old. My dad was an alternate for the Olympics. I saw him and his friend wrestling in my living room, and I told my parents that I wanted to do it. But at the time, I was too young. They both decided. So then they came back to me when I was a little older and said, we signed you up for wrestling. You're going to try it out. We think you'll be good at it. And they told me I could quit after the first year if I hated it. But I really loved it and I've enjoyed it. And so I've been wrestling now for 18 years, I believe. So it's been a long time in the sport. But besides from being a wrestler, I also take my education super seriously. I have an undergrad degree in entrepreneurship from Brock University, and I just got my master's in December in marketing from Oregon State. And besides being a student, I also love being a sister, a daughter, a friend, an aunt. And so there's many parts that make me as a person, not just wrestling, not just school. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
And I love that you said that there are other parts of you that make sense that are not just about wrestling. I feel like oftentimes, even in the collegiate level, for me, that we get lost in the sport too much and we put so much emphasis on winning and losing. And sometimes, we put ourselves in this like hole and we basically take too much out on ourselves for something that is really not as significant as we put pressure on. So I love that you're very family oriented. And I think it's really important that you mention that too, because for some people that want to join wrestling or in wrestling and feel like that everything has to be on winning or losing, it's important, like you said, to note that you wear many hats in your life.
Hmm. Yes,
So,
no, I agree. I think that I can't say I was always that way, and I think that sometimes you have to go through a rough patch to come to that conclusion. But
right.
I have found a lot of value in my life when I chose to put my value in many things and not just one thing. And I think that's a mistake many people make, is to just put all of their value into um, certain things. And I have learned to spread out my value into many things, because any one thing can be taken away from you. And so if you don't know yourself outside of that one thing or those two things, then it's kind of like a miserable life, in my opinion. So I have been fortunate enough to figure out what makes me happy, and that's many things. And so, if one gets taken away or I no longer have one, I have others to rely on. And so that was like a big coming of age thing for me. But I'm glad that I learned that because it's just a happier life, in my opinion, for me.
Right. What age did you finally learn that at? Because that is a very mature thing that you mentioned there. I mean, that's not just an overnight thing.
Yeah, I'd say that probably 24, 25. I mean, I'm 26 now, so not too long ago. It took me a long time. Maybe it has something to do with when your frontal lobe develops. I'm not really sure, but I I kind of feel like when I turned 25, everything kind of just made sense more. So I don't know if that was just coincidence or if it has to do with science or if it was a mix of both, but I just started to not get so upset at, winning and losing or like when things in life didn't go my way. I just started to see things in a more positive light, and I just realized that I didn't want to be a negative person anymore. And so I think that I learned a lot of lessons of, if I continue my life down this negative way of thinking all the time, then it's going to lead me to feel unfulfilled and unhappy. And so I just knew that I needed to make a change in my life. And I also came to the conclusion that I had put so much time and energy into wrestling and school, and I really didn't know myself outside of those two things. And I saw the people around me, my friends not in wrestling, they enjoyed things outside of, sports and stuff. And so I think I learned a big lesson from them that, I could do other things and still be an elite athlete at the same time. And I think that I was kind of fooled into believing that I couldn't have a life outside of wrestling because then I didn't care enough about the sport. And that's just the farthest thing from the truth, because you can develop yourself outside of the sport, as long as when you're doing the sport for those 2 to 3 hours a day or whatever, you're focused. And I think it's easier to stay focused when you have those other things, throughout your day or throughout your life.
Wow. I actually really like that. And I'm just taking notes, by the way. So I'm listening to what you're saying because I want to go back to certain things that you mentioned, especially to highlight the main reason why we're on this conversation and to deal with the adversities that are coming of wrestling, especially the sport itself as a whole, not
Yeah.
just everyday life, right? So 25, you learned all that. I think that's phenomenal. And I feel as though for me being 24 years old, I definitely have some things ahead of me when I turn 25, but I really do appreciate your insight on that. Let's go back a little bit. You started out when somebody, let's define what's your definition of winning and losing, especially because you've done it on such a high level and
hmm
people are looking to emulate that. How would you explain to them what winning and losing is like early on? I feel like if we have a good foundation of that, we can kind of get it so that people don't put so much emphasis on it in the beginning, because us as creatures of habit, we're very competitive and immediately people will be like, it's either all or nothing. And it doesn't
hmm
have to be like that. So what would you say is the definition for both of those terms?
Well, I think the definition of those terms can be very black and white, or
Mm,
you can look in the middle and see the gray. And I think that when we look at winning and losing, we look at it in the sense of, winning is good and losing is bad, and winning gets you further in competition or whatever, and losing doesn't do that for you. But I think that in my life, at least, I like to see the good and bad in everything. And I think that before I used to just see losing as bad and winning as good. And that was kind of my definition of winning and losing. And so I think that I have cultivated my definition to be a little different over, the years. And I think that I just try to be as optimistic as possible in any situation. And I think that that's kind of winning to me is, if I'm dealt a bad hand or things don't go my way, like winning to me is, can I come back stronger? Can I keep my mindset positive? Can, I be knocked down and get up again no matter what the situation is? And I kind of have taught myself that, to me, that's winning. And so, when we say winning doesn't matter, sometimes we say winning doesn't matter. I think that that's kind of like, uh, it's just not true, because
hmm
winning does matter in a sense, right? It
Absolutely.
it helps us reach our goals. It helps us get that gold medal, and like it matters to us because it shows all our hard work has paid off. But just because winning matters doesn't mean it has to define you as a person. And I choose to not be defined by my wins and my losses. And I take more pride in defining myself of, if I do lose, can I keep a positive mindset and can I come back in that tournament for third place? Or can I overcome all the negative talk in my head saying I'm not good enough and I'll never, get to where I want to be because I lost this match? And winning to me has kind of been, overcoming that. And I think the more you overcome that and the more, you kind of succeed in those little ways and have those little wins, the more you're going to succeed at a higher level. And so, I think that yes, winning and losing can be black and white, and it can be, winning is better, losing is worse. But I also think that you can look at losing as a positive and look at it as an opportunity to grow and um, figure out, life. Like I think a lot of wrestling can be tied to life, and you're not always going to win at life. And so, when things don't go your way, like what do you choose? Do you choose to get up again or do you just choose to, kind of surrender and say I'm not good enough? And I guess that's kind of the definition I've formulated.
I love that because it's actually funny you mentioned that wrestling is kind of life in a way. At my banquet when I graduated with my master's, I'm trying to think because I went back to school. So when I graduated with my master's, my last year, I kind of wrote this poem or speech. For those of you who don't know, not joining, sorry, it's not live. For those of you who are watching that don't know, I'm a motivational speaker. I did it for about 7 years while I was in college. So at the end of our banquet, I wrote a speech and I titled it Life is Wrestling, Wrestling is Life. Because, like you said, there are a lot of things that you can apply in wrestling towards life that can actually benefit you on and off the mat. And I think, like you said, so many times us as wrestlers put so much emphasis on winning and losing that we tend to, get lapse in judgment in a way. And when the sport is over, we act like we have nothing, but in reality, we have everything, and getting
Mm-hmm.
into that. But I just wanted to get it clear that the definition of winning and losing, actually, I don't know if you noticed this, but you said that the definition of winning and losing is basically the same thing. Can I come back stronger? Can I do this? And I love that actually. And that's the first time I've ever heard somebody say that because a lot of times we have two different sayings. Like winning is like, if most people, I guess, or how I would interpret it is winning is like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Losing is like, okay, I have a lot of work to do. You know what I mean? But you're asking yourself, you're challenging yourself both ways. Can I do this better? Like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, you can do it better when you lose, but can I do this better when I win? There's
Mm-hmm.
not much room for adjustments when you win. You're like, hey, I'm going to get back to it. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. It's working. Why not? And I love that you said that. Let's kind of get into wrestling a little bit. I watched some of your matches. I saw that you had a senior nationals run back. I think it was in January. You had a really good run up until you got to the semifinals against Marlene Didi. I think that's how you
Mm-hmm.
pronounce her name. And you didn't get the success that you were looking for. Kind of walk us through that. What was in that mindset? Because at the end of the match, you asked to throw the brick for because you were going to tie up. You got your foot out in the last second, or her foot out. Walk us through that mindset and what you're thinking at that moment. Did you think that you could come back stronger?
Yeah, I think well, I would have ended up losing anyway because she had a 4, I believe, so it didn't really matter if she stepped out, I was still going to lose. I think
Right.
I didn't really, in that moment, I didn't realize that. And so I thought that if I got that point, then maybe I would have won, but I wouldn't have. And I didn't know that in the moment, but it doesn't hurt challenging it anyway.
Right.
But yeah, I think that I just didn't wrestle as offensively as I should have that match and the whole tournament, all my matches prior, I had techs and
Hmm.
I knew that she was going to be my first decently hard match. And I think that I just kind of approached it from I don't want to lose this match. I want to I want to win the tournament. I'm first seed. And I think I kind of got away from being offensive and getting, on her legs. And I think I got a little sidetracked when I got to my front head literally 10 times and didn't score. I think that my mindset in that moment was kind of like, dang, I got her in front head again and I didn't score. And it just kept happening. And then, the doubt sets in of like, can I score on this person? And, kind of looking back on that match, I wish that my mindset was more of, it's okay, just get back, to your front head or get on her leg maybe. Like, I kind of struggled to change the strategy mid match. And so that's something that I'm really actively working on. Like, hey, if I got to front head 10 times and I didn't score once, then, maybe I'm going to hit my single, or maybe I'm going to hit a high crotch or a double, and just being able to make those mid match adjustments. And I think that comes with experience. And I think that that does come with failure, because I think that when I wrestle her or someone like her again, I really think that I'm going to have that experience of, hey, I got to this position so many times and didn't score. We need to switch it up. And so I did learn a lot from that loss. Did I want to lose? Absolutely not. I was really upset that I lost.
Right.
But, in months later, I look back on that and I'm like, that was just maybe preparing me for a better Olympic trials, and I feel like I wrestled really well at Olympic trials this year, although, I could have had some better matches. I wrestled two girls that were extremely tough and arguably the best in my bracket, and I did way better against them than I had prior to, the prior times that I wrestled them. And so to me, that was a positive, and I'm excited to continue growing off of that and learning from those two losses as well. And yeah, I guess I'm just really obsessed with the process of becoming a better me. And it's not about comparing myself to others, but just kind of in competition with myself.
I really like the fact that you mentioned that you're obsessed with becoming a better you, and the fact that comparing yourselves to other people is not really something that is feasible in the wrestling game. I mean, it's just it's one of those. It's like a double-edged sword in a way. I mean, you can continue to try to get better than somebody, but there's always going to be somebody better. And learning from your mistakes, I think, is a phenomenal thing to learn as well. For somebody starting out, I mean, you can agree that wrestling takes a lot of mental toughness, especially to continue to do it every single year, every single time. Um, what are some strategies, and how important is practice for training those, like you said, mid-match adjustments, changing that strategy? How effective do you have to be in practice versus in the match, and really to see yourself excel?
Yeah, I think that mentally I kind of got into this mindset and practice of practice, it's just practice. It doesn't matter. Just go out there and hit new things, and don't really worry about it. And that is true, and I agree with that for sure. You should be trying new things in practice and all of that. But I think that something that I've really honed in on recently is there has to be at least, some practices in your training where you treat it like the real thing.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's every single practice, but if you're never in that mindset of, I have a minute left and I have to score, like I have to go, it's going to be really uncomfortable when you're at the Olympic trials and you have a minute left and you have to score. And so I believe that putting your mind in those uncomfortable situations in practice is extremely important. And you're the only person that can kind of do that for yourself. And I think that in my training recently, in particular, I kind of had to stop telling myself like it doesn't matter, because then I felt like when I was going into competition, it was really hard for me to switch that switch in my brain and be like, oh, well, now it matters. And so I started, practicing like it matters, but it doesn't matter, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And it's kind of hard to explain, but it matters, but it doesn't matter, right? So I love that Penn State wrestling kind of treats, they talk about wrestling as being like this game, right?
Yeah.
It's like this big game, and they talk about it as they want to be really good at the game, but in the end, it doesn't matter. So if you think of like a video game, like, is it important to be good at the game to beat your competitors? Like, yeah, it's really important to be good at the game to win, but in the grand scheme of things, like, it's just a game you play. And I think that mindset has been really important for me because, when I'm in the practice room, I'm like, this is a game and I'm going to be competitive. And, I got to put myself in the mindset of like, is important. And I want to do the best that I can. That way I can perform really well in competition. But then I keep that mindset while also having the hindsight of this is just a game.
Mm,
So I think that that's something that I just started recently doing, like kind of practicing how I'm going to compete because I think I got away from that for a while. But I think that that's super important. And just from a scientific point of view, the brain is basically built on habits, and a lot of things are in our subconscious. And so repetitions of doing things, not just, physical moves, but mental thinking, your brain learns. And you can't just treat practice like it doesn't matter and go into competition and be like, hey brain, like, it matters now, like, put me in a good mindset and make my body physically ready. It doesn't work like that. And so repetitions, thinking mentally in practice, it matters because your brain is going to revert to, how you think in practice and how you approach certain situations. And so that's something I've kind of learned, through wrestling, but then also through my research on the brain and just being like infatuated with mental toughness and all of that. Like, I actually do real research on it, and I love like learning about that stuff in congruence to, my wrestling life.
absolutely. What have you learned? I'd love to hear about the brain and how you adapted that and use it in your wrestling.
Yeah, the brain is like one of the most incredible things that we actually don't even really know much about. It controls everything. It controls our thoughts. It controls thoughts. It controls, appetite, even it
Hmm.
controls emotions, all of those things. I think sometimes people think is directly in our control, but a lot of times it's the brain that controls those things. And I've learned a lot about neuro pathways, and the more you strengthen neuro pathways, the more your brain just reverts to using that way of thinking.
Hmm.
And it's an evolutionary thing. Our brain creates those neural pathways to make life easier. So, to explain that, the first time you ever drove a car, you probably had to think about everything like foot on the gas, foot off of the gas, foot on the brake, red light, green light. But then as you get older, you realize that you kind of just drive without thinking about it. And that's because you've done it so long
Yeah.
and you have, it's a habit. And so you don't even really have to think about it, and your brain is kind of just automated to do what it's supposed to do when driving. And so, when we get into these really bad habits and these really horrible ways of thinking, it's like telling someone to not think that way is like telling someone to forget how to drive after they've been driving for 10 years. Like, you can't
Right.
just unthink your way out of it. And as much as you think that you can, you can't. You have to create new neural pathways. And that's how you undo the old neural pathways. So that's something that was really cool for me to learn because, if you get into a negative way of thinking in life or in wrestling, you can't just tell yourself, or you can't have someone else tell you, well, just don't think that way. Like, it doesn't work like that. You have to actively work on thinking a different way and implementing strategies and ways to think another way. That way you're creating new neural pathways that take over the old neural pathways.
Right. I think okay, that makes sense. I guess like with the brain, you have like your subconscious, and then you have your consciousness and your unconsciousness kind of things working at the same time. Like I think I heard about how like your brain captures everything. Like you can listen to certain things, but even if something's in the background playing, like your subconscious captures everything around you, and if it needs to, it can tap into that and then kind of remind you of certain things that are happening,
Correct.
while also building those neural pathways. Is also building those habits that really can make you successful or can make you unsuccessful in certain things. And it's really important to note Just summarizing what you're saying, but like it's really important to note that, if you're doing one thing one way for a really long time, it's very hard, almost impossible to just stop and do something else. That's not how you're gonna, one, grow that and have it be a part of your nature, like how that bad habit was. But that is something that you really have to work towards over time and kind of break down little by little. And
Yes.
I think that that's phenomenal. You just reminded me of the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. Did you read that book yet?
I have not.
Oh my gosh, you have to read that book. He literally said exactly what you're saying. I mean, you'll have good background knowledge on it, but he talks about building good habits and how you could really change your life. And he's used athletes from like marathon runners to Michael Phelps to people who did the NASCAR racing, and how these great athletes developed good habits for themselves. And
Hmm.
like you said, at the end of the day, my interpretation, I'm not going to ruin the book, but like you said, it's a game. It's a game, and how can you get good at the game, but it's not that serious. Obviously, life is a different one. You want to put yourself for life, it's different because you want to put yourself in a position where it can be a game that you can win. And
Hmm.
that might seem crazy, but you have to really, again, a lot about life and what I learned from my personal experience is that, you want to put yourself in positions where you're going to do good and excel, and you want to work on the things slash maybe be a little bit more conscious about the things that you're maybe not too good at in order to get better at them so that you can succeed in your career, whether that's a business or on the map. And I think it's really important that you mention that. And I kind of want to hear again, like how you adapted that in wrestling. Was that so, knowing your knowledge, was that something like, for instance, when you looked at a win or you looked at weight cutting, actually, let's go into that. When you looked at weight cutting, how did you develop that new knowledge about your brain into weight cutting for those people who struggle with that?
Yeah, so I would say with the weight cutting, like with wrestling, I kind of developed like an eating disorder, which I think most wrestlers develop if they
Same.
cut a lot of weight. I definitely struggled with that, and I didn't even realize I had one because I was so, surrounded by everybody that kind of had disordered eating, and so I was comparing myself to other people with disordered eating. And so it made me really hard to kind of pinpoint that I had a problem until, it got really bad. And so, I did a lot of research on that, and I learned a lot about how the physical body can actually give you a mental eating disorder, which I think is absolutely insane. And
Really?
it goes back to physiological science. And so most wrestlers obsess around food, and they go through those binging phases and all of that. And I think a lot of times people will say that it's your mental space and it's how you approach food and it's controllable. But when your body has been through severe restriction, and I'm talking physiological restriction, in addition to mental restriction. But if your body has been through physiological restriction, which is, the physical act of losing a lot of weight that is uncomfortable for your genetic body, your body will actually send you messages and thoughts about food to try to get you to eat. So if your body is physically at a weight that is too low for it, it's going to consume your mind with thoughts of food to try to get you to eat, because your brain is there for your survival. It's not there for you to win, the US Open title at 20 pounds under your natural weight. And
Mhm.
so, I just learned a lot through that because I was just really tired of people telling me that it was like my willpower, or that I could do it and I was just being a baby, or it's not that hard, because I really had my physical body fighting me a lot. And so, yeah, I kind of took that knowledge and I applied it to my career. I decided to go up a couple of weight
I
classes. I
actually wanted to
just,
segue into that because I did see
yeah,
your post where I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no, you're okay.
I think that, like you mentioned, it's so funny because you said that, and now I know why my Instagram feed was full of food during the season, because my body was trying to tell me, "Oh yeah, you're hungry." I love that, and you're absolutely right in that case. But I wanted to mention a post that you posted. I think maybe it was a year. It was recent-ish, like a year or so, within a year.
Okay.
And you talked about how you had been struggling with your eating disorder and how you were going to go up a weight, and that your heavier self is a better version of yourself. You felt better mentally, physically, and emotionally. Walk us through that experience. You had a whole post on it. I did repost it because I thought that was phenomenal.
Yeah, so I weighed about 163 before I cut any drastic weight, and I was wrestling 68 kilos, which is about 149.7. And so I cut
Mhm.
a decent amount of weight for about 6 years. I would always kind of go back up to 163, cut down to 149, and I did that process a lot. And then I decided one year to cut down to 143, and it was just a little bit too much for my body, and I lost my ability to feel full for like a year and a half, I'd say. And I was in this constant, like, getting bigger, getting smaller, getting even bigger than I was, getting smaller, getting even bigger than the biggest I was. And I was stuck in this like yo-yo, and I just know how diligent I am about being on top of my health and being on top of my weight. And I just knew that this was like a physiological issue that I was having. And so I just decided that it was best for my body to just go up in weight and let all of this settle, and wherever my body, kind of landed, that I was just going to accept that. But I had a lot of problems with that because as most women feel, I wanted to be a smaller person. I wanted to be a smaller body. I wanted to be as lean as possible. There's a lot of stigma, like, about girls weighing over 150. And so I had it in my head that I shouldn't weigh over 150, and that if I did, I was lazy and I didn't care about my health, and all these just crazy thoughts that aren't true. And I
Mhm.
also just didn't know that I could be 168 pounds and be the healthiest I could be. It was just really hard for me to accept that I could be in a bigger body but healthier than ever, like mentally and physically. But yeah, I mean, I let my body grow to where it wanted to be. And I'm not 163 pounds anymore where I was before, but I'm about 168, which is an extra 5 pounds. And I think my body fat only went up 1%. So I've gained a lot of muscle because I've allowed my body to gain a lot of muscle. And I don't think about food 24/7 anymore. I don't have binging behaviors anymore. I can go on vacation and not gain 5 to 10 pounds when I come, after the vacation. I don't have food anxiety anymore. I don't get scared to go out to eat. I don't obsess about calories. And so for that to be the difference of 5%, or sorry, 5 pounds and 1% body fat, to me, that's worth it. And,
Absolutely.
if I did decide to cut down to 68 kilos, I think that all those thoughts and all of those negative behaviors would come back, because it's not a healthy weight for my body. And the only way for me to get to 68 kilos would be to starve myself and to do excessive cardio. And I have just chosen that my health is more important than that. And so I chose this path. And I know that I've had a couple people say to me after trials, like, oh, 68 was a easier weight class. Why didn't you go 68? And my answer to that is, no gold medal at the Olympics. I would not trade my health for any gold medal regardless. So I think that that was a huge step for me to say that, because I didn't always think that way. I would put a gold medal before my health in the past, but I don't do that anymore because I value my health above any gold medal. So.
Right. And Skylar, I love that you've learned over the years that you're very you stay true to yourself. You don't lose yourself in the process. I think it's a really important thing to mention that you're stating here without saying those words. You've realized from those errors that you're, going to stick true to yourself. You, like you said, we played those many hats. um you seem to have like a really good grasp around like who you are as an individual in the sport and the role that you play. Was there ever a point in time, because you mentioned that your father was also an Olympic athlete, correct?
He was an alternate for the Olympics, yes.
Alternate for the Olympics, he was still phenomenal at the sport. Was there ever that kind of pressure for you once you knew that you were really good at this sport from the fact that your father had laid the foundation in that aspect for you when you were competing? Or was it just, again, this is about getting better at me. This is just a sport, it's just a game.
Yeah, I know my dad's friends joked with him like, "Oh, your daughter's gonna like surpass you." And I never really had anybody say anything to me, really regarding my dad. I separate those things, and I'm just not really a jealous person in general. I'm not gonna compete with my dad. He wrestled
Right.
however long ago, and I'm really proud of his accomplishments, and so I don't see that as competition at all. We live in a different worlds than back then. Things are different, and yeah, I've just never really compared myself to him or any of my siblings. I Most of my siblings didn't wrestle, but I have really stayed in my own lane for, the majority of my life and most capacities. And yeah, I never felt like I was living in his shadow or anything, but I think he also did a really good job of not making me feel that way as well. And yeah, I think our relationship is good in that sense. And um yeah, that's how I feel at least.
Right. No, I love that. And again, I like how solid you are because I guess from my own experience, I felt like going back to the weight cutting thing, like I feel like us as wrestlers and getting into that, the weight cutting and having to do it once or every week, you get into a role of I have to lose weight, and your body is kind of like already naturally built that toxic habit of like, okay, I can't eat now. I gotta like lose weight. I'm a little bit heavy, and it's sometimes at the wrong time. It's like, yo, why is my body stressing right now? I'm like, I'm doing a test. Like, why am I thinking about losing weight? And I think that can become a lot after a while. And then off season shows up. Most people who cut a lot of weight blow up during the off season, wrestle really good, and then towards the middle of their off season or whenever they're done, they're not competing really tend to blow up and kind of like want to cut back down again, and then it just gets harder and harder mentally and physically. And I think for those people, originally, I feel the origin for those people who don't know of cutting weight is to have a better advantage on the competition, so that when you go out there, like you have a little bit more strength technique versus the person who's probably a little bit smaller than you relatively, when cutting weight wasn't that popular. Now you see more people in sports, combat sports especially, going to cut weight to get an advantage against their opponent, but it can really be unhealthy. I mean, we have UFC fighters, and I haven't heard of any wrestlers, but I mean, like people's livers shut down because they cut so much weight so fast, and it can be really toxic and not really good. I don't even know. Well, I guess you get an eating disorder with you when you do it for a long period of time. But yeah, it's just nobody really talks about all that stuff about the cutting weight and how it affects you mentally and physically after the fact. And I think that you did a good job of realizing like, hey, I'm gonna go up because I feel like my life is not doing too well right now, especially. And I think that, that's the best thing for me, and I'm gonna stick with that, even though it might be easier at a different weight class.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think also we assume that people are all the same and that, if it's easy for someone, then it must be just as easy for someone else. And I think that that's just not true. For example, for women versus men cutting weight, totally different thing. Women, the minimum body fat that a woman actually should have in order to have kids in the future or, at whatever time is actually 22%.
Mm,
And, at least when I was in college, it was like, yeah, to be an elite wrestler, the best body fat to have is 16%. And so, that's a lot under the minimum that you should have to be a healthy woman by definition. And so I think we kind of compare it maybe to guys like, oh, well, guys can be super lean or guys can cut 10 pounds or whatever. Yeah, but guys are also not, bearing children. And so sometimes we have to look at the science. I think science is an incredible resource that we have and that we're learning more about. And I think that in the wrestling community, we just want it to be nice and, tough love. And, that doesn't always work with cutting weight. And
Mhm.
I think that a lot of people have old views on cutting weight, and they're so stuck in this way of thinking that it's about your willpower and all of that, when there's really so much more that goes into it. And I just hope that people are more open to listening about, the physiological and psychological consequences of cutting weight, because they're there. And, I could talk to you about the research I've done all day, but it's a super important topic that we really need to pay attention to, because, I think that it really affects people's lives in a negative way. And I think that if people were a little more educated on this type of stuff, that they could maybe change what weight class they go to, and or change what weight class they wrestle in, and make their lives a little better. But it's also a very individual road
Experience.
that you
Yeah.
have to take. And that's the thing that stinks is, for a long time I thought 68 was best for me, and then I realized, it wasn't, and nobody could lead me down that road. I kind of had to figure it out for myself. And I'm happy that I love doing research and stuff to figure that stuff out. But yeah, it's a difficult process, and it's different for everybody. And I think that we just need to make sure that when we approach young athletes, that we know that maybe there's some similarities between individuals, but everybody has different genetics and different cutting weight capabilities, and we can't just assume it's a one size fits all.
Right. I think it's a good point to mention. I think it's really important for people to do their research before they cut weight to see if it is actually a good fit or it is something that they should do, or maybe they should just like get better. I mean, I don't know. I mean, some people use, I feel like, in my, again, my own opinion, I feel like some people use cutting weight as a crutch because they don't think they'll be good at the natural weight they are, when that's in fact may not be true, especially
Yeah.
because, it's anybody's day on the mat. But I think one thing for sure, the physiological aspects of cutting weight long term. I mean, I go around, I see these people who wrestled before, and like when they were in season, they look really good in shape, probably borderline bulimic because they're probably not eating. And then out of season, you just see them blow up like a damn balloon, and I'm like, yo, that is not good. And
Mhm.
over time, you just see them get bigger and bigger, especially when they're done with the sport. I've already seen some of my own teammates. I mean, I stopped wrestling 2 years ago. Some of my own teammates are already balloons, and
Yeah.
they've cut so much weight or was restricting themselves from the things that they needed to compete. And that's like not good because now these people develop these eating disorders, or now they have like, there's just something wrong with them.
Well,
And
the thing that's interesting is there is a psychological component and there's also a physiological component, and the two kind of go together. And so when you see people cutting weight and then they eventually balloon up, it's hard to tell, did the egg or the chicken, whatever that saying is,
yeah.
what came first,
Yeah.
right? And so it's kind of that way with like the physical and the psychological. Well, did the psychological get messed up and then the physical followed, or was the physical body disrupted and the mental space, went in that direction as well? And at least with the research that I've done, is when we see people cut a lot of weight and then they balloon up, it could be like one of two things, or it could be a mix of both. Either psychologically, they're so tired of restriction and so tired of, you know, this idea that they have to restrict, and so they go completely the other way of, I'm done with this, I don't want to restrict, I want to eat whatever I want, blah 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 blah. And it could be that avenue, or it could also be their body is physically so depleted that their hunger cues are now messed up, and so their body's not physically telling them that they're full, and so they keep
Mm,
eating and eating and eating because they're not getting the proper hunger cues, because they didn't listen to their hunger cues all of their wrestling career, and now it's messed up, because your hunger cues are supposed to be in congruence with each other. Your mental space about thinking about food is actually supposed to decrease when your physical body reaches satiety. But what happens in the case of wrestlers and stuff, I think we play with those hunger cues way too much. And I think our body is like, you know what? I'm just going to tell you you're starving all the time. Like mentally and physically, I'm going to tell you you're starving all the time. And so, if you actually look at people that don't yo-yo diet, they're able to maintain their weight within a certain body fat percentage most
What
of
was
their
that term?
lives.
Sorry. Yo-yo?
Yo-yo dieting, it's when
What's
you
that?
like put on weight and then lose it and then put on weight and then
Um,
lose it. And we're seeing that people that don't yo-yo diet and just maintain their natural weight,
yeah.
that they stay around the same size their whole lives. And
Mm,
we're seeing that people that do yo-yo diet that, lose weight and then gain it back and then lose weight and gain it back actually end up being heavier than when they first started their yo-yo dieting. And
right.
so those are interesting facts for the wrestling world and interesting information against cutting weight in my opinion. And
Mm,
of course there's going to be cases of people that cut weight and then they go back to their normal weight or whatever after the season and they're like, oh, there was no harm in cutting weight. What do you mean? I'm still a healthy weight. And it's like, that's great for you. But there's also people that cut a lot of weight and their body physically went the other direction. And it's not this game of, willpower, quote unquote.
right. Right.
So everybody's situation is different, and I think that we need to start listening to people when they say that they have these issues, instead of just dismissing them and being like, "Well, it worked for me. I cut 20 pounds, and now I'm, still at a healthy weight, 20 pounds more, and I never gained more weight than my pre-diet weight. Like, good for you, but doesn't happen with everybody."
Right. Right. I guess in that case, for those people who are yo-yo dieting, you shouldn't be cutting weight, especially because it could affect you afterwards to the point where, like, what are the long-term effects that you've seen or that you've done your research on for people who've yo-yo dieted?
Yeah, like I said, yo-yo dieting can affect your hunger cues, and so your body kind of like gives up on you in a sense. Our body sends us signals of, hey, your stomach's growling, like you need to eat. And so then when you ignore it and ignore it and ignore it and ignore it, you kind of lose that hunger cue. You might mentally still be thinking about food, but sometimes your physical body will kind of shut off that physical hunger to keep you from feeling uncomfortable. And then as soon as you start eating more and fixing that mental hunger of all that food that you're thinking about, your body kind of wakes up in a sense, and then it starts sending you those signals nonstop, like, oh, wait, actually, we're starving. So now you have all this physical hunger and all this mental hunger, and it just comes at you, full throttle. And then, as the body is getting bigger and bigger, depending on your genetics and everything, you might adjust to that bigger body. And now
Right.
your hunger cues can be even more out of sync because now you're in a bigger body, and a bigger body scientifically can get even bigger because the more fat that you have on your body, the more adipose tissue that you have, the more your hunger cues actually get increased even more. And so it's kind of the effects of yo-yo dieting. And that's not to say that there aren't some people that gain a lot of weight and then their body comes back to equilibrium. But there's a lot of people that cut weight, get to an even higher weight, and stay there because their genetics want them to be there.
Right. Right.
So
Wow.
that's just what I've learned. I mean, like I said, everybody's case is a case by case basis, but like you and I have seen, there's some people that, oh, they kind of blow up over the summer after the season, but then they come back down to their natural weight eventually, 2 years later, whatever. And then we also see the people that blow up and never come back down and stay
Mm,
bigger. Then we see the people that blow up and keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so everybody's situation is different, but I think that we really need to start paying attention to like, hey, there's a trend here. There's a trend that wrestlers are really in shape and then in their later lives they're not. And can we just attribute it to wrestlers being, weak and having no willpower post wrestling career? I don't think so.
mm. I love that point that you made. This is like afterwards, like, okay, where are these people going? But that was a lot there. I just want to be able to make sure that I got it and all the audience understands it as well. In the fact that, again, when you're cutting weight, it's really important to make sure that if you are going to cut weight, you could try to do it safely, or you just really don't do it because these consequences are not just for right now, they could affect you later on in life as well. Um, Skylar, I have a couple more questions for you. We're running low on time. Having to balance everything from family to schooling, and your natural hormonal cycle as well. How is that? How have you been able to compete as well as having like a thing that happens at the end of the month, if you don't mind me asking? How does that play into wrestling and how does that affect your move or how you compete?
Yeah, I think with women, it's different. We are different by nature than men. So there are some things that you have to navigate, but um, I think that just kind of adapting my training schedule to how I'm feeling mentally and physically has been super important. Maybe not pushing on some days where I don't feel physically that great. I mean, men's hormones, you guys have the same hormonal cycle over the course of a day, whereas a woman has a different hormonal cycle every day of the month. And so that's definitely something that should be considered. But yeah, I mean, I think that just having a little more grace with women and knowing that our hormones are different and that we don't get the same cycle every single day that men do, can be super beneficial in learning how to coach women and how to deal with women. And yeah.
I love that. What advice would you have for somebody who's trying to do what you do and step their foot into the thing, which is women's wrestling?
I think that the best advice that I would have is that it's hard, but life is hard at the same time, and you should treat it, as a game, and you should want to be really good at the game because I think that it's important to be really good at life, and that as long as you're giving 100% effort and you feel that you're giving 100% effort, that at the end of the day that's all that you can give, and you should just always strive to be a better you and try not to compare yourself to others so much, and just constantly be obsessed with becoming a better person or a better athlete, and or all the other roles that you play in your life. I think that that's what makes life fun, is just learning and being better the next time. And you're going to inevitably make mistakes, and you're going to inevitably come across barriers and problems, but I think that if you just look at it as a game and look at it as a way to learn and come out even a better person, friend, etc. I think that there's fun in that.
Right, right. No, I love that point that you made, and you have to find the enjoyment in wrestling, really, to continue to go because after it's just going to get harder. But you got to realize it's a game, and like we said, it's not that important in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
What is next for Skylar Grote? What should we look forward to for you competing? I know you have World Trials in September. What
Yeah,
else do
it's
you look forward to?
non-Olympic world team trials in September. So
Oh, is
that's
that
kind
it?
of.
Or
Yeah, I'm probably going to Spain as well in July just to get a couple of matches in at 72 because I haven't wrestled 72 kilos in like 2 years. So I'm probably going to go to Spain and wrestle 72 kilos a little bit because it's been a while since I've wrestled that weight. And then I'll have, the trials in September and then hopefully Worlds in October.
perfect, perfect. And for those of you who do not follow Skylar on Instagram, Skylar, drop in your socials so that we can follow you and stay on track with your journey.
Yeah, my Instagram is just Skygrote, SkyGrote, and my Twitter is the same. You can also follow Skylar Grote Wrestling on Facebook, and I believe that's all my social media.
Perfect, perfect. Well, this has been an episode of Sean Takes On podcast with Skylar Grote, and we will see you next time.